there are a couple things that was said by Brett Yormick today, the Big 12 commissioner, that I was like, damn. Okay. He came out today and said that they have a TV rights deal with ESPN until 2031, which means we're not getting the Big Two conference until 2031. He alluded to that they're not stopping with adding teams. I think that's going to be Oregon. And he took a massive couple shots there. And I've already told you what I thought about Colorado. Buddy, I know that Oklahoma and Texas are leaving and going to the SEC, but I don't think the Big 12 is going anywhere. I really, really don't. You add in a Cincinnati market, you add in a Houston market, and if you could get an Oregon and Colorado, then you really add something. I would assume that Oregon State would follow in that as well. So good on him. But the biggest thing is him taking shots at Oklahoma and Texas. He did not hold any weight. He talked about how they did not run the league and recruiting and saying, well, they don't run the league. I mean, everybody's doing good. And he's not wrong when it comes to Texas, Joe, because TCU, Baylor, and Texas all have the same amount of Big 12 titles in the past couple of years. So he's not wrong there. What did you think of Big 12 Media Days?
So I want to touch on that first as you bring it up. It's really strange, the dynamics of the Big 12, in the sense that the two biggest brands in the conference were not always the ones that were the most consistently successful. And
no, they weren't.
Oklahoma more than Texas lately, but in the past 10 years, it's been a lot of other different teams, and they attract the most attention. They attract the biggest fan bases. That doesn't happen in any other conference. That just doesn't. It would be like if Mississippi State was consistently winning the SEC
West.
Right, which would feel really strange if that was happening. The top teams in the SEC are consistently the ones with the biggest fan bases. The same thing can be said for the ACC with Clemson and Florida State. The same could be said for the Pac-12 with USC, Oregon, those big fan bases. But for whatever reason, there's good parity in the conference. It's not going to hurt them. I don't think it's going to hurt them in terms of having successful teams on the field. Where it does hurt them is the amount of eyeballs that they need on a week-to-week basis to match the Texas and the Oklahoma fan bases. Part of me wonders maybe that's why they want to seek out, and he made a statement. He said that there is strength in numbers and that they might look to fill that 14-member number that they're at right now before the Sooners and Longhorns leave. So maybe they need to just go after more teams to fill that gap.
Well, I do think that there are some eyeballs they can get. If Deion can get Colorado flipped, okay, if Oregon with Dan Lanning can continue to do some things, I think there's teams out there, okay? Like, I don't think that they're hurting. And I understand what you're saying in reference to eyeballs, right? Like, I get it, okay? Eyeballs mean nothing when those teams are getting their teeth kicked in, right? True. So if Oklahoma and Texas come in the SEC and get their teeth kicked in, the Big 12 might not look so bad, right? Like, because in retrospect, well, you were getting your ass kicked in the Big 12 too. I mean, Joe, we're a year away from TCU with a first-year head coach and Sonny Dykes getting to a national championship game before Brent Venables, Lincoln Riley, Tom Herman, and now obviously Steve Sarkisian. Sonny Dykes was the first one to break through. Well, Sonny Dykes and the crew are back. And quite honestly, if this year goes the way that they, I'm listening to the Big Horn Frog media over there, and they're thinking that they're going to win the Big 12. They want retribution. They want to get back to there. Kansas State, okay? Joe, Kansas State is returning over 1,000 snaps. Over 1,000 snaps at one position. No, not 1,000 snaps. Over 10,000 snaps at the offensive line. 10,000 snaps along the offensive line.
That's a big deal.
What's going to happen if Texas and Oklahoma, if either one of them can't win the Big 12? We think about them as a big brand. They are massive brands. Being a blue blood and being a good brand don't mean a damn thing when that ball gets kicked off. It doesn't matter. It legitimately doesn't matter. If Texas goes into week 2 and gets their teeth kicked in by Alabama, it's not going to matter. If they can't win the Big 12, it's not going to matter. I think that he's somewhat right here a little bit.
It's the same shit that we do with the Dallas Cowboys every single year.
And
we talk about him. We talk about him.
That they're from Texas.
Yes, exactly. My point is that it's like, oh my God, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to be so good this year. Is Dak going to be as good as he possibly can? And the media cycle just churns and churns and churns. And it's the same thing with Oklahoma and with Texas, because that they know that there is an attraction to those brands historically. There are regions where football is a lifestyle. It is not just a sport that is observed like in other parts of the country. But that's kind of what my whole point is, where it's such a weird dynamic, because they could go to the SEC and they could be a very middling team that recruits well, attracts players, but does not cultivate success on the field. And like, what's more valuable? Having a program where even if they win 5 games, they still have a high retention and viewership numbers, or good programs that are going to show up and put out competitive, good football teams that aren't going to get their teeth kicked in and upset. Like that's the strange dynamic of it.
That is the strange dynamic of it. And I agree with you, man. I just, like if God willing, Kansas State pulls through, right? Like if they pull through and win the Big 12, if Baylor and Dave Aranda find a way to get back to their competitive ways, okay, it's just going to be such a bad look on Texas and Oklahoma that they can't win their own conference. Now, I do think one of the two are going to do it. I do think that they're going to do that, but I'm not as bullish on Texas as everybody is. I'm really not. Okay. I know they have good athletes. I know that they have a lot of good players. They have a lot of good athletes and a lot of good players a lot of years. The thing that people will forget, we're acting like Steve Sarkisian was left a dumpster fire at Texas. He was not. No. Okay. He was left some really good players and he poo-pooed them. Okay. Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, the dudes that he had on the offensive side, Quinn Ewers, I get it, but you should not be any less than 10 games winning 10 games. Like, it should not happen in the Big 12. And so I look at Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's a little different. They were absolutely decimated by the portal, right? They can't really control that. But I just have a feeling, what's going to happen, Joe, if we're sitting here in week 7 and Kansas just took down Oklahoma? Because it could happen.
It's possible.
By the way,
Jalen Daniels is a good football player.
Did you see his chain, by the way?
Yes. I tweeted out that obnoxious edit that I did, but I got to be honest, that was a little much. I know that everyone was freaking out over that. That's a little much.
Well, this is what I said. I wanted a chain just like that so I could put my shows on it, like recap of my shows. Hey,
oh my God.
You know what it looked like? Can I tell you what it looked like? I'm not trying to poo-poo on the kid. It looked like he took out the center of a smartwatch.
I was going to say, it looked like an Apple Watch.
It looked like an Apple Watch, didn't it?
I bet that's what it is. I would be willing to bet that's how that was manufactured. The other part of this,
Kansas was 5-1 before he went down.
They were beating up on crappy teams, but I think that they go over 500 again. I think that Jalen Daniels.
Who were they beating? Like, game day was there. Who was the team that they were playing when game day was there? They lost.
TCU. They lost to TCU.
It was TCU.
Yeah, that was before the TCU hype. That was before, and then TCU won that game.
TCU was still undefeated. But if you remember, in that game, TCU was not leading until Jalen Daniels went down. Remember? Like, it was something crazy that happened, and then they wind up losing after their quarterback goes down. Regardless, and back to the main point here, I don't think that I think Texas loses. I think Oklahoma loses. Even if, by the grace of God, one of them gets to the playoffs, it'd be great for the SEC if one of those teams did going into next year. It's not going to happen, in my opinion. I think that there are way too many good teams in the Big Ten, way too many good teams in the SEC, way too many good teams even in the Pac-12 right now. Joe, are you taking USC or Texas? right now? If you had to take a chance,
USC.
okay,
As much
are
as
you
it pains
taking
me.
Oregon or are you taking Texas?
I'm taking Oregon.
We saw what happened with Washington and Texans a year ago. Are you going to take Oregon or Oklahoma? I kind of want to tend to lean Oregon. So
Yes.
the Big 12, quite honestly, they haven't gotten anything from Texas in the last 10 years any damn way. So I get that it's a big marketing and branding that they're like, I am not trying to take away that Texas is a big deal. Oklahoma is a big deal going into the SEC, the two biggest brands in the conference. I get it. However, let's not act like one of those teams in Texas has been worth a damn in football enough in the last 10 years for you to just go out here and say, oh, well, the Big 12's in trouble. Says who? These other teams were out there kicking their ass anyway.
Nah, yeah, that's my whole point. I really don't think that they're going to be missed, as your Mark is talking about here. They haven't shown up. They've recruited fine. They've brought in some talented players, but none of those guys have developed. I do want to hit on, Blake, the comments that he made about expanding to 14 and getting more teams here. I don't know if we can necessarily pinpoint what the ceiling is for the amount of teams that they go after, but we've talked about this a lot. Like, we've talked about this a ton of what direction can they go in if they do expand further. There's so many different teams that are out there. But I actually think that, unlike what we thought a couple of years ago when the news broke that Texas and Oklahoma were leaving, everyone was freaking out and said, does the Big 12 fall apart? Does it crumble? I think that they're one of the best positioned conferences right now in the country. Not saying that they're ahead of the SEC. I'm not saying they're ahead of the Big 10. I place them ahead of the ACC and the Pac-12 for the direction that they're going in.
I would agree. Now, listen, you got to be careful when a commissioner talks. This is something I learned a long time ago.
Yeah.
You got to be careful when a commissioner talks because you come off this high. You're ready for football to happen. You got to really listen to what he's saying. It's great he's got a TV deal till 2031. ACC's got one until 2036. So remember, because Florida State wanted to leave and they owed, what was it, like 100 and something million, close to 100 million if they left. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I get what you're saying. They do feel like that they are doing things. Now, one thing that I will say that I do think is interesting is that, number one, they haven't laid down and rolled over and shown their belly, right? They haven't rolled over like a dog. They're doing this ESPN Deportes. They're doing this ESPN and Big 12 to Mexico. They're doing a lot. ESPN's doing a lot of things in Mexico and other places with them in basketball. That's why, again, I'll just continue to say it. I don't think you go to a Big 2, but it is good. Look, you have a very large Spanish culture in a lot of these areas, right? And so I think it could bode well. You know, if let me just, like, if UTEP and Baylor went to Mexico City and played a football game like Kansas City and what was it, the Raiders? When it Kansas City Chiefs and the Raiders?
Yes.
And that place was sold out.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can sell out 100,000 seat stadium, well, Joe, I don't think it's that bad of a deal. I think that they actually might work for them. And it's a whole nother viewing market. I think the Big 12 is going to be okay. I don't have any faith in Texas that they're leaving, that it's a big deal. Now, that could just be me, but who knows? Have we done the Big 12 recap yet?
We did. We did that preview, and I picked Kansas State, who I think is.
And I picked Oklahoma.
I want to say yes. I don't remember exactly.
I don't remember who I picked either.
You might not have given a pick
in Kansas State.
Yeah.
I don't think I formally picked anybody.
I don't think you did. So who would you pick?
I think if memory serves me correctly, I came out here and said I don't trust any of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because remember, we talked about Cincinnati and Houston. Could Cincinnati and Houston go in there? And I said, hell no. Cincinnati just lost their coach and they got depleted by the portal. Who would I pick? I still like Oklahoma, though, in this, Joe. I mean, I think they got a lot of talent. One team I'm not picking is Iowa State. I will tell you that right now. You know, here's an
hater.
Well, here's an interesting thought. How does Dave Aranda bounce back? How does the Aranda man bounce back?
I don't know if there really is a path to bouncing back. I feel like the ceiling for Baylor, like they can have these big years, but you need like a premier player to lead things. And like is Blake Shapen the guy that's going to lead them? I think they're going to be a well-coached team, but 9 wins is accomplishable.
Well, if they get to 9 wins, they could win it because they did it a couple years ago. Now, the question would be, is that they did it with LSU. I mean, not LSU. They did it with Matt Rule's players. And so that is a big question mark that he's going to have to answer. Dave Aranda is a really good coach. He's not a good recruiter. He never has been. The only way that he can sustain is if he really starts recruiting at a better level. We will wait and see on that. You know what I did think is a little bit interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of these live teams, bro, did you know that Vanderbilt is out recruiting most of 2/3 of the Big 12 right now? Did you get?
Wait, are you talking about like in their current 2024?
Yeah, in the current. So stay with me. Do you know that there's a chance in the next 2 or 3 years that those teams in the Big 12 could easily get beat by Vandy?
I don't know if they're knocking
on the door.
That.
No, they're knocking on the door of a top 25 class. They're knocking on the door of a top 25 class.
But is that actually going to be sustained? Like, is that something that
Clark Lee's there? It might.
They're
recruiting their asses off. I think they're like 33rd right now, and they have a couple of recruits that are about to pop.
They have 2 4-stars. They have 19 3-stars.
I know.
I've always said that with a program like Vanderbilt,
you got to keep those kids like that and develop.
You got to get a shit ton of 3-stars, and you need a couple of them to really develop and shine. But I don't know if, sure they're going to out recruit Kansas and Iowa State.
There's no reason why they should be out recruiting Cincinnati, Baylor, and Houston.
That's true.
There's no reason why they should be out recruiting UCF. There's no.
Wait. They're not out recruiting UCF right now. That's not true. UCF's been one of the hottest teams over the past month with some of the recruits that they've pulled. I think that they're higher ranked.
Where's UCF right now?
They're 46, but they have wait. But they have 12 kids committed compared to
it doesn't matter. That's a part of it.
No, but a lot of the times though, these rankings, I don't put a lot of stock in because there's a reason why I don't put a lot of stock into the July rankings because my dumbass was hyped up about Notre Dame last year and we were number 1 and look where we finished.
That's a little different.
I think it's the same. Academic schools getting kids committed and then someone comes in and offers them money and then they decommit.
You're talking about a top 10 class. We're talking about like generalities of recruiting.
But I think there's a good chance that a lot of those, not a lot of them, some of those kids are going to get plucked. Like some of those kids are going to
got a kid in Kamari and Pimpton that might be the next Kyle Pitts. Kid went to LSU. Like legitimately 36 on the ACT. Dude was like a mega star book dude. Okay. He's 6'6", 240. Just throwing that out there.
I will say this, though, before we do turn the page. I do think that UCF can do some damage. I feel like that hasn't been talked about a lot, and I don't know if it'll get brought up tomorrow. But, man, they are regionally in such a good spot. I know I shat on them talking about their –
The problem, though, Joe, is there's so many teams in Florida.
They've had more success in the past decade than most.
By the way, Georgia's going in there and plucking dudes. Alabama's going in there and plucking dudes. LSU's going in there and plucking dudes.
Good point.
When a team let me just say this from a recruiting aspect. When teams are transferring conferences, which you know what? I just had a thought. How can teams transfer conferences, but people and coaches are mad when players are transferring?
It's a good point. It's a really good existential point, but at the same time, it takes a couple of years. You can't just immediately do it.
Well, I'm just saying, you went out and got 2 schools, and and people get mad that Eli Ricks went to Bama, which I get from an LSU standpoint, but I mean, just interesting.
It all wraps into the anti-transfer portal conversation.
Correct. But you know what's interesting? If UCF starts doing things, that means they got to take recruits from somebody else.